Some stories people send me leave a bad taste in my mouth, but this one kept me nauseated for the remainder of the day. Which is good, I guess, because I wouldn't want to be too hungry. This story, titled "The Case That Made Me Regret Becoming a Police Officer," from an anonymous individual, describes an extremely disturbing incident that happened just before Christmas in what I believe is Wisconsin. And I sincerely hope it isn't as true as the author claims it to be. They don't say the year this happened, but if there's an ounce of truth to this story, the next time you see snow, you'll be barricading your doors and windows. Because I'm about to tell you how to make a Wendigo. I found them on the morning of December 19th, 3 days after the blizzard had finally stopped. The Tilsons, that was their name, though I would not learn it until later that afternoon, when we ran the plates on what was left of their Dodge Durango. My name is Dale. I've been a deputy for my town's sheriff's department for 11 years, and in that time I've seen my share of things that keep you awake at night. I've seen hunting accidents where a man's face looks like something from a butcher's window. And up here there have been snowmobile crashes, leaving bodies scattered across frozen lakes like broken toys. But nothing, and I want to make that clear here, nothing had ever prepared me for what I found half buried in the snow that morning. It was Benjamin Brierly who called it in. Benjamin runs a small construction operation about 4 miles north of town, and he'd been trying to get his equipment out to a site near the Shawamigan forest line. The plows hadn't made it that far yet, and Benjamin, being Benjamin, had decided to take his truck out anyway, to see how far he could get. He made it about 2 miles before he spotted something dark jutting out of a snowbank on the shoulder of Gilligan Road. At first, he told me later, thought it was a deer. We get a lot of deer strikes on that road, especially in winter when they come down from the hills looking for food. But then he saw the chrome of a side mirror catching the morning light, and he knew it was a vehicle. He didn't get out to investigate. Benjamin is 73 years old and has lived in these woods his entire life. He knows better than to go poking around at things that don't look right. So he just backed up his truck and drove home. That's when he called the sheriff's office. I was the one who took the call. The drive out to Gilligan Road took me nearly 40 minutes. The county plows had cleared the main routes, but once you get past the Erickson farm, the road becomes a white corridor through black trees. The snow piled up on either side like frozen waves. My cruiser's tires crunched and slipped on the packed ice beneath, and twice I had to stop and reverse to get around drifts that had blown across the road overnight. It was cold that morning. I remember that much clearly. The thermometer on my dashboard read -18, and when I cracked my window to smoke a cigarette, the air hit my face like a slap. The sky was a shade of pale blue, which meant post-heavy snowfall. Bright, clean, and utterly empty. Nothing was moving anywhere except that thin curl of smoke from my cigarette and the occasional cascade of snow falling from an overburdened pine branch. I found the Durango about a 1/4 mile past the old Hensler mill, right where Benjamin had said it would be. The snow had drifted up against the driver's side, almost to the window line, and the rear end was completely buried. Only the front passenger side was relatively clear, and that's where I parked my cruiser and got out. What I noticed first was a strange smell. It shouldn't have been possible, not in that cold. At 18 below, everything freezes. Blood, tissue, bacteria causing decomposition. But there was a smell coming from that vehicle. Faint, yes, it was, masked by the clean bite of winter air, but unmistakable. It was the smell of meat. Raw meat that had been left out too long, sweet and thick. I approached the Durango with my hand on my sidearm. though I couldn't have told you what I expected to find. A bear, perhaps, one that had gotten into the vehicle and could not get out. It happens sometimes. Could be a pack of coyotes that had somehow forced their way in and were still inside, feeding on something or each other. But even as I thought about it, I knew that didn't make sense. The doors were closed, and the side windows I could see were intact. But as I got closer, I saw the rear window was a different story. It had been shattered completely, jagged teeth of glass still clinging to the frame, frozen blood smeared along the bottom edge. I remember thinking, this is where it got in. The passenger side window was frosted over from the inside. I pulled my sleeve down over my hand and wiped a clear patch in the eyes. I looked in. My breath was stolen from me. What I saw in there was what was left of the Tilson family. There were 3 bodies, a woman in the front passenger seat, and 2 children in the back, a boy and a girl, both young. I learned their names later: Margaret, Andrew, Sophie. But right then, in that moment, they were no longer people. They were just remains. Messy, horrible remains. Margaret Tilson was still wearing her seatbelt. Her head was tilted back against the headrest, and her mouth was open. And her eyes were open too, filmed over by frost. Her coat, a red parka, cheerful and bright, was torn open at the chest, and beneath it, her sweater was dark with frozen blood. There were wounds on her throat, and her shoulders, and her arms. Bite marks, dozens of them overlapping and ragged, the flesh torn away in chunks to expose the white of bone beneath. I stepped back from the window. My breath was now coming fast, fogging the air in front of my face, and I could feel my heart trying to break through my ribcage. I've seen violence before. I've seen what humans do to each other when they're drunk or angry or scared or hateful. But this was different than anything I'd ever seen. I made myself go back to that window. I had to look again because that's my job. And because somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was telling me that what I was seeing could not be real. That I must be mistaken. There had to be some explanation that didn't involve what those wounds so clearly suggested. The kids in the back seat were worse. They had been, well, it's hard to describe it without sounding clinical, and I apologize for that. But clinical is the only way I can get through this part. They had been partially consumed. Large portions of soft tissue had been removed from their arms and legs and torsos. Andrew, the boy, was missing most of his left thigh. The girl, Sophie, had wounds on her face that had taken her cheeks and her lips and most of her nose. And there was the driver's seat. The driver's seat was empty. I walked around to the rear of the vehicle, where the broken window gaped like a wound. Below it, the snow was disturbed, a rough, irregular furrow cutting through the drifts toward the tree line about 30 yards away. It looked like something had been dragged. The trail was smeared with blood, dark against the white snow, and it led into the forest, disappearing into the shadows between the pines. Something had been pulled out of that vehicle. That was my assumption. That was the only thing that made sense. I called it in. I stood there in the snow beside that charnel house of a vehicle, and I called Sheriff Carnegie, telling him what I'd found, telling him we needed everyone, medical examiner, state police, search and rescue, everyone. Then I went back to my cruiser, and I sat in the driver's seat with the heater running and the doors locked, and I watched the tree line until backup arrived. I want to be clear about something. I was not afraid of what I might find in those woods. I was afraid of what I already knew was in there. Because sitting in that cruiser, looking at the trail of blood leading into the forest, I'd already constructed a narrative in my mind, a story that made sense of what I'd seen. A family traveling through the blizzard, taking a back road to avoid the worst of it, or maybe lost, their GPS leading them astray. The car goes off the road, gets stuck, the snow piles up. They can't get out, they try their phones, but there's no signal out there. There never is. They wait for help that doesn't come. And then, something finds them. Something comes out of those woods. A bear or a pack of wolves. Whatever it is, it tears open the car, gets inside, and begins to feed. Then it drags the father, drags him out into the snow and into the woods, and that's where we'll find what's left of him.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies.
That's the story I told myself, the story I believed. I was wrong. The team arrived within the hour. Sheriff Carnegie came himself, which told me he understood the severity of what we were dealing with. He's a big man, Carnegie, with a stone-cold serious face and hands that could crush granite. He'd been a sheriff for 15 years, and in all that time I've never seen him rattled. But when he looked through that frost-covered window and saw what was inside, his face went pale, and he stepped back. He said a phrase I'd never heard him say before. Jesus Christ. The medical examiner's van arrived 20 minutes later. Dr. Marnella Verde, we call her Marnie, climbed out with her two assistants, and I watched her face as she approached the vehicle. She's a small woman, about 5'2", with dark hair and equally dark eyes. And she has the steadiest hands I have ever seen. I've watched her perform autopsies on bodies that would make most people vomit. And she never flinches, never even looks away. But she looked at the Tilson family, and I saw her flinch. "Get me a full kit," she said to her assistants. Her voice was flat, controlled. "And call Dr. Paddocks in Ashland. Tell him I need a consult. Tell him it's urgent." "What is it?" I asked. "What do you see?" Marnie looked at me. Her dark eyes were unreadable. "I see a lot of things that don't add up, Deputy. And I'm not going to speculate until I've had a chance to examine them properly. But I will tell you this." She paused. She glanced back at the vehicle. "Those wounds weren't made by any animal I'm familiar with." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Just the pattern and the radius to the bites. The entire methodology is wrong." She shook her head. "I'll know more once I get them back to the lab. But right now I don't know what made those wounds. Not even a guess." I pointed toward the tree line. "There's a drag trail leading into the woods. A wedding band on the woman's finger, empty driver's seat. We're assuming a fourth victim, the father. Whatever got in through that rear window must have hauled him out the same way." Marnie studied the trail for a moment, then turned back toward her van. "I'll know more once I examine the remains." Then she walked away. Search and Rescue assembled their team. They strapped on their snowshoes and checked their radios and loaded their rifles. Because whatever had done this, nobody wanted to meet it unarmed. I watched them disappear into the trees, following that frozen river of blood into the shadows. 3 hours later, they came back empty-handed. The trail, they told me, went on for almost a mile. It wound through the trees in a wandering, irregular path, as if whatever was making it didn't know where it was going, or didn't care. There were places where the blood was so thick it had melted through the snow to the frozen ground beneath. There were places Other places, they found pieces. Small pieces of something that might have been clothing, or perhaps flesh. It was impossible to tell in that cold. But they hadn't found a body yet. Eventually, the trail tapered out. A combination of wild animals, wind, and heavy snowfall can do that. That night, I went home to my apartment in town. I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I tried very hard not to think about what Marnie had said, about those wounds, how nothing she knew could explain them. Outside my window, the snow began to fall again. Light flurries at first, then thicker, heavier, until the streetlight on the corner was just a fuzzy orange glow in a world of white. I watched it for a while, drank too, and I told myself we'd likely find the victim tomorrow, the fourth one, that he was out there somewhere in those woods, buried under the snow right now, waiting to be discovered. That was before the report came in. The call came in at 6:47 the following evening. I remember the exact time as I was sitting in the station break room, watching the clock and waiting for my shift to come to an end, when Carnegie appeared in the doorway with a look on his face that made me feel sick. "We've got a situation," he said. "The Lindqvist place, out on County Road Ave. Something attacked a little girl." I was on my feet before he finished speaking. "Attacked? Is she?" "She's alive. Shaken up bad, but alive. Her dog drove it off, whatever it was." Carnegie grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "I need you out there, Dale. You were first on the scene yesterday. If this is connected, I want continuity." The Lindqvist farm was about 6 miles east of where we'd found the Tilsons. I was there in about 15 minutes. my cruiser fishtailing on the icy roads as I pushed it faster than what was safe. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, but the clouds were still low and heavy, and the light was fading fast. By the time I pulled into the Lindqvist driveway, the sky was the color of a bruise. The farmhouse was old but well maintained, a 2-story clapboard structure with a wraparound porch and Christmas lights strung along the eaves. They were blinking red and green against the gathering darkness, and for some reason that detail struck me as obscene. Those cheerful lights, that festive glow, 4 days until Christmas, and somewhere out there in the woods, something was hunting. Carl Lindqvist met me at the door. He was a big man, Swedish stock, hands like shovels. I'd known him most of my life, actually. He'd been friends with my father back when my father was still around, and I'd never seen him look the way he looked that night. His face was stricken. His eyes were red-rimmed and wet. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward the interior of the house, like he was expecting something to come lunging out of the shadows. "She's in the kitchen," he said, "with her mother. She won't stop shaking, Dale. She won't stop." "What happened?" Carl shook his head. "She was walking back from her friend's place, only a half-mile through the backfield. She's made that walk hundreds of times. She had the dog with her, thank God. Bruno." He paused and swallowed. "Something came out of those trees. Something came after her." The kitchen was warm and bright, smelling like coffee and cinnamon. Anna Lindqvist was sitting at the table with her daughter in her lap, rocking her gently back and forth. The girl, her name was Rachel. I remember now, Rachel Lindqvist. She'd been in the Christmas pageant at the Lutheran church last year. She was wrapped in a heavy quilt, shivering despite the heat from the wood stove in the corner. Her face was pale, nearly translucent, and her eyes had a distant, unfocused quality that I recognized. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone whose mind was trying very hard to be anywhere else. In the corner by the stove, lying on a folded blanket, was a German Shepherd. Bruno. He lifted his head when I came in and regarded me with dark but smart eyes. There was a bandage wrapped around his hindquarters, spotted with blood that had seeped through the gauze. "Deputy Purcell," said Anna. Her voice was steady, but I could see the effort it cost her. "Thank you for coming." "Mrs. Lindqvist." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from them, keeping my movements slow. "Hi, Rachel. I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me what happened. Can you do that?" Rachel didn't respond. She kept staring at some point over my shoulder, her small body trembling beneath the quilt. "She hasn't spoken since she came home," said Anna. "Not a word. She just sits there and shakes." I leaned forward. "Rachel, look at me, sweetheart." Reluctantly, the girl's eyes drifted to my face. They were blue, those eyes, a pale washed-out blue that reminded me of the winter sky. And there was something in them that made me want to look away. A knowledge, an awareness of something that no child should ever have to know. "I need you to tell me what you saw," I told her. "I know it's scary. I know you don't want to think about it. But there might be other people in danger, and you may be the only one who can help them. Do you understand?" Rachel stared at me. Eventually, she nodded, just slightly. "I was walking home," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Through the back field. Bruno was with me. He always walks with me." "That's good. What time was this?" "I don't know. It was getting dark, and my friend's mom gave me cookies to bring home, and I was carrying them in a bag, and Bruno was running ahead of me, the way he always does." She paused. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "And then he stopped." "Bruno stopped?" "Yes, he just stopped, right in the middle of the field. and he turned around and looked at me, and he was making this sound. Rachel's voice cracked. This sound like whining and growling at the same time. Like he was scared and angry, both at once. I glanced over at the dog in the corner. He had lowered his head back into his paws, but his eyes were still fixed on me. And there was something watchful in his gaze. He was still very alert. What did you do? I stopped too. I looked where Bruno was looking, at the trees. Rachel's hands emerged from beneath the quilt and gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. There was something there. Something in the trees watching us. Did you see what it was? No, not at first. It was just a shape, a dark shape, kind of hunched over between the trunks. But it was moving, swaying back and forth like it was. She broke off. Her breathing was coming faster now, shallow and rapid. Like it was excited. Anna pulled her daughter close, pressing her lips to the top of Rachel's head. It's okay, baby. You're safe now, you're safe. But Rachel wasn't finished. The words were spilling out now, tumbling out of her in a rush, as if some dam had broken inside her and everything she'd been holding back was flooding out at once. It came out of the trees. It came out, and it started to run towards us. And it was so fast. Bruno ran at it, and I heard them. I heard... She was crying now, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I heard Bruno screaming. Dogs don't scream, but he was screaming. And there were these sounds, wet sounds, and I ran, and I didn't look back. I just ran until I got to the porch, and Daddy was there, and... She dissolved into sobs, burying her face against her mother's chest. I sat there and watched her cry, and I felt something cold settle into the pit of my stomach. Something that had been there since I'd first looked through the frost-covered window and found what was left of the Tilson family. Rachel, I said gently, I need to ask you one more thing. The shape you saw, the thing that came out of the trees, did you see what it looked like? Rachel raised her head. Her face was wet with tears and her nose was running, and she looked so young, so impossibly young. It looked like a man, but wrong, all wrong. It was moving like a man, but also like he was an animal, on its hands and feet sometimes, and it was making sounds. What kind of sounds? Rachel's face crumbled. Hungry sounds. It sounded hungry, she whispered.
Business owners, you are the unsung heroes of America. You have courage, you risk everything, and you make it happen. We at Patriot Software applaud you.
I stayed at the Lindqvist farm for another hour, taking photographs of Bruno's wounds and documenting Rachel's statement. The dog had deep lacerations on his back legs and hindquarters. Defensive wounds, I thought, for when he'd put himself between Rachel and whatever had come out of those trees. Carl told me that Bruno had come limping home almost 20 minutes after Rachel, dragging himself up the porch steps and collapsing in the kitchen. The vet had come out and stitched him up, but he'd lost a lot of blood. It was a miracle he'd made it back at all. Before I left, I walked out to the backfield with my flashlight. The snow was churned up about 200 yards from the house, a chaotic mess of footprints and paw prints and dark stains that I didn't want to look at too closely. The tracks led back toward the tree line, and I followed them with the beam of my light. But I didn't go into the woods, not alone and not in the dark. I stood there at the edge of the woods, listening. The night was quiet. I didn't hear wind or animals at all. I did hear the distant hum of a truck on the county road, but that was about it. But then, from somewhere deep in those trees, I heard something. A low and rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, but not quite. It rose and fell and rose and fell, and there was something about it that made my hair stand on end. Something that made me want to turn around instantly and walk away without looking back. So I walked away. I did not run, but I walked quickly, and I did not look back until I was in my cruiser with the doors locked and the engine running. The Lindqvist family decided to leave town temporarily after that incident. I was glad to see them out of harm's way. The next morning I called Marnie. She picked up on the fourth ring and sounded exhausted. She said, "I was going to call you. I've been working on the Tilson remains all night. There's something you need to see." So I drove to the county morgue in Ashland, a low brick building on the outskirts of town that always smelled faintly of formaldehyde. Marnie met me at the door and led me back to the examination room, where 3 steel tables held the draped forms of Margaret, Andrew, and Sophie Tilson. "I've completed the preliminary examinations," she said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "And I have to tell you, Dale, I've never seen anything like this." "Like what?" She walked to the first table and pulled back the sheet, revealing Margaret Tilson's upper body. The wounds I'd seen through the car window looked even worse under the harsh, fluorescent lights. Ragged craters of torn flesh, exposed muscle, and bone. "These bite marks," said Marnie. "I've been comparing them to known animal attack patterns." We went through the list. Bear, wolf, cougar, wild dogs. But she shook her head. None of them match. The bite radius is too small for a bear, too large for a canid, and the pattern, she pointed to a cluster of wounds on Margaret's shoulder. "Look at this. See how the teeth marks overlap? Whatever did this bit down released and bit down again multiple times in almost exactly the same spot." "Sorry, but what does that mean?" "That's not how predators feed, Dale. When an animal attacks prey, it bites to kill or to tear away flesh. It does not bite the same spot over and over. That's..." She paused, and I saw something flicker across her face. "That's compulsive behavior. Ritualistic, almost." "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying I don't know what made these marks. but I can tell you what I found in the wounds themselves. She moved to a small table where several evidence bags were laid out. Saliva traces. I've sent samples to the state lab for full analysis, but I ran some preliminary tests myself. She picked up one of the bags and held it up to the light. Human. This is human saliva. The room seemed to swirl a bit. I put my hand on the edge of the examination table to steady myself. That can't be right. I ran the test 3 times. The results were consistent. Marnie set the bag down and looked at me. Dale, I don't know what happened to this poor family, but I think we need to consider the possibility that the 4th victim, the father, wasn't a victim at all. I raised an eyebrow. You think he did this? You think a man did this to his own family? I think something did this, and I think that something was human, or at least used to be. She pulled back the sheet over Margaret Tilson's body. There's more. The children's stomach contents showed signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. Based on tissue degradation, I estimate they were alive in that car for at least 4 days before they died. Maybe 5. 4 days. I mean, the blizzard raged for at least 3. That meant they'd been trapped in that car, slowly starving, while the snow piled up around them and the temperature dropped and help never came. Even when the blizzard stopped, they were trapped. The mother's stomach was empty, Marnie continued. Completely empty. She hadn't eaten anything in days. But the children, she hesitated. The children had consumed food within the last 24 hours of their lives. Small amounts, irregularly distributed, as if someone was feeding them and keeping them alive. I thought of what Rachel Lindqvist had said, the things she'd seen in the trees. It looked like a man, but wrong. All wrong. What about the father? I asked. Robert Tilson, any sign of him? They haven't told me anything more about the search and rescue. Marnie shook her head. Search teams have covered a 3-mile radius around the site, but there was nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace evidence. The trail went on and then vanished. It's like he just disappeared. But he hadn't disappeared. I knew that. He was still out there somewhere in those woods. And whatever had happened to him in that car, whatever he had done to survive, it had broken him in some way. I thanked Marnie and drove back to the station, and I sat in the parking lot watching the snow begin to fall. I couldn't stop thinking about the Tilsons. Can you imagine being trapped in your own car, a blizzard piling snow on you? I thought about the cold and the hunger and the desperate arithmetic of survival. I thought about a man looking at his family and making a choice that no man should ever have to make. Then I thought about Rachel, walking home through the backfield with her dog, while something watched her from the tree line. Something just as hungry, if not worse.
Creativity is not something I wait for. I am Antoni Sendra, a filmmaker. I'm always hunting and hustling.
3 nights later, I encountered it myself. I had been working double shifts since the Tilson discovery, and Carnegie had finally ordered me to take a night off. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Tilson's face. Her mouth open, her eyes filmed with frost, her body partially devoured. So instead of lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I got back in my cruiser and drove around. Figured I was just patrolling, keeping an eye on things. But I knew where I was actually going, even if I wouldn't admit it to myself. I drove out past the Erickson farm, past the place where the plows had finally cleared the snow from Gilligan Road, past that spot where the Tilson's Durango had been towed away 2 days earlier. I drove until the road turned to packed ice, and the trees grew closer on either side, and I kept driving. It was nearly midnight when my engine died. There was no warning, no sputter or cough. One moment I was driving, and the next, everything just stopped. The engine, the headlights, the dashboard display, even the radio, which had been playing some old country station out of Duluth. It cut off mid-song and left nothing but silence. I found myself sitting in the dark, my hands still on the steering wheel, and I listened to the nothing. The night was overcast, and without my headlights, I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The trees on either side of the road were just shapes, black against blacker, and the snow on the ground seemed to glow just faintly, reflecting light from some source I couldn't identify. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Then I tried it again. The engine wouldn't even turn over. I reached for my radio to call for assistance, but before my fingers touched it, I heard something. There was a sound from outside my car, from the woods. Breathing. It was so faint I thought I might be imagining it. But as I sat there in the silence, not moving, barely daring to breathe myself, the sound grew louder, clearer. It was coming from somewhere to my left, maybe 20 or 30 yards into the trees. A slow, rhythmic rasp of air being drawn in and expelled, in and out, in and out. And then I heard the footsteps. These weren't the crisp crunches of boots on snow. Something softer. It was something wetter, like bare feet slapping against ice. They were moving through the trees, circling around toward the front of my cruiser, and they were getting closer. I drew my sidearm. The weight of it in my hand was reassuring, solid and real, in a way that nothing else seemed to be right now. I thumbed off the safety, pointing the barrel at my window, and I waited. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. I sat there in the dark with my gun raised and my heart going mad. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. And I stared at the window, waiting for something to appear on the other side of that glass. But nothing did. And yet I could feel it out there. I could feel it, like when you know someone is looking at you from across the room. That sort of prickle on the back of your neck. That primitive awareness that something is watching. It was there, just beyond the reach of my vision, and it was looking at me. "Robert Tilson?" I called out. My voice sounded so strange. I felt really loud and really scared. "Robert, if that's you out there, I need you to come out and show yourself. I need you to walk out where I can see you. Right now." The breathing went on. In and out, in and out. "Robert, I know what happened. I know about the car. I know about your family." I think I was really just talking to fill the silence, to hear something other than that terrible rhythmic rasp. "Whatever you did, whatever happened out there, we can help you. We can get you somewhere warm, get you something to eat." The breathing stopped. And then, from somewhere very close enough that it might have been right outside my window, I heard a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A low, wet, gurgling noise. It rose and fell, and after a moment I realized what it was. Laughter. Something was laughing at me. I don't remember deciding to try the ignition again. I just recall my hand moving, turning the key, and the engine luckily roaring to life, as if it was scared too and ready to go. The headlights blazed on, flooding the road ahead with harsh white light, and I stamped on the accelerator. I drove for 3 miles before I trusted myself to stop. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking something fierce. I could barely hold onto the steering wheel. I sat there on the side of the road panting like a dog, and I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw nothing but darkness and snow and the faint red glow of my taillights reflecting off the ice. But I know what I heard out there was real, and I knew what it was, circling my car and watching me through the glass. It had let me go. We found the den on Christmas Eve. It was a search and rescue volunteer named Pete who spotted it. A dark opening in a snowbank about half a mile from where the Tilsons' car had been found. At first he thought it was an animal burrow. Could be a bear preparing for hibernation. But when he got closer, he saw the fabric. Red fabric. The same shade of red as Margaret Tilson's parka. I was part of the team that went in to investigate. There were 6 of us, all armed, moving in a tight formation through the trees. The snow was deep here, untouched by plows or foot traffic, and it came up past our knees as we approached the opening in the bank. Within 10 feet of the den, that same smell I'd discovered in the car hit us. "Jesus," said one of the volunteers. He was a younger guy around his mid-20s, and his face had gone the color of old paper. "What the heck is that?" I didn't tell him. I kept on moving, my rifle ready. My eyes were fixated on that dark opening. The den, because that's what it was, I realized. A den, a lair, a place where something had been living for some time. It was about 4 feet wide and about 6 feet deep. It had been hollowed out of the snowbank and reinforced with branches and strips of bark, creating this crude shelter against the cold. The floor was packed earth and dead leaves, and it was littered with various debris, like bones, scraps of cloth, some kid's shoe, small and pink, with a cartoon character on the side. "All right," I turned and said. "No one goes in. This is a crime scene. We document everything from out here and wait for forensics." But even as I said that, I was scanning the interior of the den with my flashlight, looking for something I hoped I wouldn't find. Someone's body. A corpse. Evidence that Robert Tilson had crawled in here and died, and that whatever had been stalking the woods around Harlan County had died with him. But there was no body. Beyond the debris, the den was empty. We were photographing the scene when I heard the same low rhythmic breathing sound which I'd heard outside my cruiser. It was coming from somewhere behind us, somewhere in the trees. "Nobody move," I said quietly. "None of you make a sound." We stood there in the snow, 6 grown men with rifles, and we listened to something breathe in the shadows between the pine trees. It circled us slowly, moving from tree to tree, never showing itself, never making any sound except that terrible wet rasp of air. It circled once, twice, 3 times, and then it was gone. We stayed calm, and we walked out of those woods in formation, covering each other. But we walked fast, and we didn't stop until we made it back to the road. Nobody said a word the entire way.
When a child is in the hospital, visitors come to say hello. And when visiting hours are over, they leave. But family does whatever it takes.
That same day, we got the dental records back. I was at the station when Marnie called. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She said to me, "You need to come down here, Dale, right now." I drove there at a very illegal speed. The sky was starting to darken with clouds, and the forecast was calling for another storm. A big one, perhaps the worst this season. Perfect timing for Christmas. Marnie was waiting for me in her office. She looked worse than I'd ever seen her. She had dark bags under her eyes. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, and her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, which had long since gone cold. There were papers spread out all over her desk, and she was staring at them. "Close the door," she said. So I closed it. "Sit down." And so I sat. She pushed one of the papers across the desk toward me. It was a dental chart, covered in annotations and highlighted sections. I looked it over, but I didn't understand what I was seeing. That's Robert Tilson's dental record," said Marnie. "I requested it from his dentist in Minneapolis 3 days ago. I've been comparing it to the bite impressions I took from Margaret and the children." I felt that cold sensation again, that weight settling into my stomach. "And what did you find?" Marnie picked up another paper, this one covered in photographs, close-up shots of wound patterns and bite marks. "The impressions match, Dale. Every single one of them. The bite marks on Margaret, Andrew, and Sophie Tilson. They were all made by the same set of teeth." She looked up at me. Robert Tilson's teeth. I stared at those photos. Then I stared at the dental chart. I tried to make myself understand what this meant, even though clearly I'd known all along. To be honest, I think I knew the very moment I saw that empty driver's seat and that blood trail leading into the woods. "He ate them," I said. "He ate his own family." "It's worse than that." Marnie's voice was flat, drained of all emotion. "I told you before that the children had consumed food in the last 24 hours of their lives. I've completed the analysis of their stomach contents." She paused. "They were fed water regularly over a period of at least 4 days. Someone was keeping them hydrated, keeping them alive. If he was going to eat them, why would he do that?" "Because, Dale, dead meat freezes. Living meat does not." Marnie's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that might have been horror, or might have been a terrible kind of understanding. At 18 below, a body becomes useless for a predator within hours. The flesh freezes solid. You can't eat it, you can't digest it. But a living body generates its own heat. A living body stays warm. She set down her coffee cup. He kept them alive so he could feed on them longer. I thought I was going to be sick. I put my hand over my mouth and breathed deeply, fighting the urge to retch, and I stared at those photographs and those dental charts, and I tried to comprehend what kind of desperation, what kind of madness could drive a man to do something like that to his own family. "The mother," I said. "You told me her stomach was empty." "Yes, she stopped eating first. Or he stopped feeding her first. I can't tell which." Marnie rubbed her eyes. "Based on the wound pattern, she was the last one the last one to die. The children were first. Maybe she let them, maybe she thought it would buy time, maybe she thought someone would find them before." She broke off, then shook her head. "I don't know what she thought. I don't know if I even want to know." Outside the window, the first flakes of snow began to fall, drifting down from the gray afternoon sky like ashes. There's one more thing, said Marnie. The blood trail leading away from the car. I had the samples analyzed. She pulled out another report, but she didn't hand it to me, she just looked at it. Most of it was Robert Tilson's blood, but not all of it. There were traces of other DNA. Margaret's, Andrew's, Sophie's. Well, what does that mean? Marnie set the report down. It means that when Robert Tilson crawled out of that car and into the woods, he was carrying some of his family with him. Inside him, in his hands, he'd consumed enough of their flesh that their DNA was present in his blood. And I don't mean in the related kind of way. She paused. So, Dale, Robert didn't get dragged away. And he's not a victim. He crawled out of that car under his own power, and he disappeared into the woods, and he's still out there. That image of Rachel came back into my head. The little girl walking home through the back field. When Bruno threw himself at something in the darkness to protect the little girl. All along it had been Robert, deranged, driven mad by hunger and circumstance. Suddenly I heard that gurgling, wet laugh come up from my memories. A chill ran through me. God, what do we need to do? I asked. That wasn't Marnie's job. She gathered up the papers on her desk and straightened them into a neat pile. You need to catch him. My official report will list the truth. But Dale, I looked up at her. She said to me, this is something we probably don't want the public knowing for a while. I left Marnie's office and drove back to Harlan County through the first flurries of what would become the worst Christmas Eve storm in about 30 years. The radio was playing carols, but I turned it off and drove in silence, watching the snow build up on the windshield between each pass of the wipers. The official report was filed on December 27th. A murderer at large, 3 victims. The explicit details left out. And as Robert remained unfound, people stopped talking about the Tilsons as much as they used to. It was crazy how quick they became a memory, but that was likely due to what happened next, because people didn't know that these incidents were related. The first incident after Christmas happened on the night of December 29th. A woman named Carol was driving home from her sister's house on County Road M when her car broke down about 2 miles from the Lindqvist farm. She called her husband from her cell phone, told him where she was, and said she'd wait in the car with the doors locked until he arrived. He arrived 18 minutes later, but the car was empty, and the driver's side door was hanging open. This is going to sound familiar, but there were drag marks in the snow leading toward the tree line. But here's where it gets different and disturbing. These drag marks were not leading away from the car. They were leading towards it, as if something had been crouching and crawling low in the trees, waiting, and had rushed the vehicle the moment Carol opened her door. We found Carol the next morning, about a quarter mile into the forest. She was barely alive, hypothermia set in, and she'd lost 3 fingers to frostbite. When she woke up in the hospital 2 days later, she told us what happened. Something had charged her car from the darkness, something fast and pale and almost like a man. She'd panicked, threw her door open to run, and it grabbed her ankle and began to drag her into the snow. She'd kicked free somehow. She didn't remember how, and she'd run into the trees, but it chased after her. She could hear it breathing behind her. Eventually, she fell into a ravine and hit her head on a rock. When she woke up, it was dawn, and she was alone. But there were bite marks on her left calf, shallow ones, like it had started to feed on her and then stopped, like whatever it was had been interrupted or changed its mind. I asked her if she'd gotten a look at what attacked her. She thought for a few seconds, then said something that made my blood run cold. "It was wearing clothes," she said. "It was naked mostly, but it had something around its neck, like a scarf or a tie, something red." Robert Tilson had been wearing a red Christmas sweater when his family left Minneapolis. I'd seen it in the photographs his wife's sister had provided. A grinning man in a garish red sweater, his arms around his children, a Christmas tree glittering behind them. The last picture ever taken of the Tilson family. The second incident happened on January 3rd. A group of teenagers were having a bonfire in a clearing about a mile north of Gilligan Road, drinking beer, telling stories, braving the cold. Around midnight, one of them wandered off into the trees to relieve himself. His friends heard him scream. They found him 20 yards from the clearing, lying face down in the snow with deep lacerations on his back and shoulders. Something had attacked him from behind, knocked him down, and begun to feed. When his friends came running with their flashlights and shouting, it had fled into the darkness. The boy survived. 53 stitches and a night in ICU, but he survived. When the doctors asked him what attacked him, he said he never got a good look at it. Just a shape, a shadow that moved like a man but smelled like rotting meat. But here's what nobody put in the official report. What the boy told me when I interviewed him alone, without his parents or a doctor present. He said that when he was lying there in the snow, with that thing crouched down on top of him, eating him, it said one word. Just one that it repeated over and over. Hungry. The old-timers in Harlan County have a name for what Robert Tilson became. The Ojibwe who lived in these woods for centuries before the first Europeans arrived knew too. They had stories about what happened to people who consumed human flesh, about the hunger that followed, and about how it hollowed you out from the inside until there was nothing left but appetite. Wendigo. That's the word. If you look it up on the internet, you get a bunch of art of a creature with antlers or a deer skull head. But what the actual folklore shows you is something described as a demon of the frozen north. Something that dates back to missionaries and fur traders in the 1700s, of accounts of men becoming something. The Wendigo is not a giant monster in the woods. It's something that attacks you from the inside and changes who you are. It's a transformation that starts with an act of desperation and ends with the complete annihilation of everything human inside you. The hunger doesn't just consume your body, it consumes your soul. Winter is here, and it's been quite cold where I live, but it has been much, much colder here before. I remember winters here in previous years that hit -15, and I thank my lucky stars that my family and I never got stuck somewhere lacking food or water. But I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, I wouldn't be putting anything human in my mouth, no matter how hungry I got. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Now, I know Wendigo and Skinwalker stories are a favorite here, but I definitely want more unexplained encounters beyond those topics. Ghosts, demons, other monsters, and so on, especially some foreign stuff. So if you have a story of the unknown and terrifying, send it to me at darkstories.org. And if you want to know what I want for Christmas, just leave Unexplained Encounters a follow and review or rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Thank you, and Merry Christmas, everyone. I regret to inform you that I had to interrupt my Pal World session to read this intro, but hey, look at the bright side. There are some pals in the deep woods waiting for you right now. Big, hairy, sharp-toothed pals that might be a little bit upset if you tried to throw your ball at them. Welcome to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter, @DarkPrevails, where I have engaging conversations with my fans, like whether or not your parents made you say sir or ma'am. People brought up a lot of trauma with that one. Anyway, today's episode features deep woods encounters that will scare your socks right off. And if you're not wearing socks, then you're missing out, because socks are awesome. Enjoy, and don't forget, I dare you to scare me. Send me your scariest stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org, and we shall see if my socks stay on or not. Also, join me on my Discord via the link in the description. It would be cool to start doing some contests, giveaways, or other cool things there. Now, let's begin. Willow River. From Inquisitor 4196. This may be one of the scariest encounters I've had in my entire life so far. It was December, a few days after Christmas. I decided to go hunting with a friend of mine. We'll call him Gabe. Gabe had agreed to go hunting with me as he didn't have much to do at the time, and he wanted to get away from his girlfriend for a while. They'd been fighting a bit, and he needed a break from that. I had him drive over to my place with all his stuff ready to go. When he arrived, I was almost ready myself. Just needed to grab primer for my gun of choice, the muzzleloader. I loaded up all my stuff in his truck, locked up my house, and got in the front seat. We drove off. I was living in Minnesota at the time, and I still do, but we chose one of the worst places I could have chosen for the hunt. As we drove there, we talked about the hunting conditions at the place. Specifically, we were heading for a cabin on Sturgeon Lake. After the 2-hour drive, we finally arrived and got out of the truck. We went in the cabin and got settled in. By then, we were quite tired, so we decided to go to bed. We would get things set up in the morning. A while later, Gabe had fallen asleep, but I was still awake. I had this feeling of dread that I couldn't explain, like someone or something was watching me through the window. I got up and went to close it. Before I was able to close it, I saw 2 big yellow glowing orbs about 20 feet up in the trees outside the cabin. I strained my eyes, trying to get a better look at what it might have been, but I couldn't make it out, whatever it was. So I ignored it and closed the window. I went back to bed. The following morning, I got up and made coffee for Gabe and I. Then I woke him up. As I waited for the coffee to be done, I went into the spare bedroom and got out our gear, including our guns. Once we were both ready and had our coffee, we set out together for a place called Willow River. After about an hour's walk, we arrived. We set up the blind and flattened the brush around it. Then we crawled in. It was after about 30 minutes that we started to see some activity. We spotted a doe with a fawn walking out into a clearing next to the river. We let them go, of course. We weren't there to orphan a young fawn that seemed to be only a few months old. After that, we had a 4-point buck come out into the clearing. We left it alone, though. We were seeking bigger bucks than that. We didn't have much else come out into the clearing for a while, maybe about an hour and a half. But by then, suddenly, I started to smell a gut-wrenching stench that was almost unbearable. I thought it must have been a black bear, so we both tried to ignore it until the smell got even worse and worse. Then, it came out into the clearing. We were looking at the most hideous-looking deer we'd ever seen in our lives, extremely malnourished, bones breaking from its skin. One of its antlers had long since been snapped off, and it stank of rotten flesh and garbage. For a malnourished deer, it was very large, and its limbs seemed to be stretched out in this weird, disfigured way. After we looked at it, Gabe whispered to me, "Should we put it out of its misery? That thing looks really sick." I responded, whispering back, "Yeah, I guess. Looks like it's got rabies or something just as bad." Just then, that deer snapped its head up and stared straight at our blind. It then began to move closer to us. I raised my gun, ready to shoot, wanting to get a broadside shot, just in case I messed up the deer more if I went for a neck shot. But the deer didn't turn, and just kept coming closer, until I didn't notice that Gabe was pointing right at its head and pulled the trigger. After the smoke cleared, the deer was gone. But what we did see was a giant puddle of blood, right where the deer had been standing. We assumed it must have been hit, or at least grazed by the bullet. We waited a bit, then followed the blood trail. Several minutes later, the trail stopped at the base of a tree. The two of us were confused. We looked around the area, but all we found were scratches on some of the trees. We decided to pack it up and head back to the cabin. That included us going back to the clearing and picking up our blind. We walked back to the spot where we had left it, but when we got there, we found the blind torn to shreds. It reeked of the smell we had smelled on that deer. We tried to ignore the loss of the blind, walking back to the cabin without it. It was an unsuccessful hunt, and it was growing darker by the second. When we got back, the place was thrashed. Almost everything that had been inside had been pulled out or destroyed. As we looked around, I glanced towards the tree line outside and saw a pale figure standing about 8 feet tall, with the same broken and messed up antlers as the deer we'd shot. Then, from the direction of the figure, a gut-wrenching scream resounded. It sounded like the cry of an angry man, mixed with the sound of a female elk in heat. As soon as we heard that, we both hopped in the truck and floored it home. After the events of that trip, I started to look into cryptids. The only match I could find that fit the description may be the Wendigo. And after hearing of its story, I just feel lucky to be alive. What did I see? From Appalachian Hiker 290. This happened in January of 2023. Now, I'm of Native American blood, and I believe in the tales my grandmother often told me. At the time, we had just gotten a new dog. I'll call her A. I was taking A out on her nightly walk, which mostly leads to her chasing our local chickens. This night seemed normal. Clouds covering the sky and moon, which was a disappointment, as I would have preferred them be out. Our local chickens were not out and about this time. It was cold and way past dark. It was a windy night, and the sounds of squirrels running up and down the trees often overcame the sounds of the wind. Suddenly, A stopped. She sniffed the air and started to jerk towards our shed. Then, out of nowhere, the wind stopped, and so did the rest of the noises around me. I was used to this. I knew that sometimes the woods can go silent, especially when a predator or a person was out in them. Not to mention the place I lived was known for mountain lions. A suddenly stopped tugging her way to the shed. I looked up towards the shed, and what I saw still chills me to my core this very day. Whatever it was huge, at least 9 feet tall. I could only see the outline until I brought out my phone flashlight. The thing was unnaturally skinny, like it hadn't eaten a bite in months. You could see its bones and ribcage. Its fur was matted, and parts of it appeared to have been torn from its body. In certain places, you could see torn flesh. Its arms were unnaturally long and lanky, but the hands ended in razor-sharp claws, which appeared to be stained a deep red. The legs looked like the legs of a deer, but too long, too lanky. Its head was also shaped like a deer's, but with fur and spots only barely hanging in place. The eyes were small and black, but would chill any person to the bone looking into them. The antlers were those of a huge buck, but they seemed worn and weathered, like they'd been used for something besides show. I froze. A came off her leash and began to run to the house. The creature's head suddenly snapped in my direction, causing me to let out a sharp and quick shriek, and I dropped my phone to cover my mouth. By that time, my pit bull B and my Rottweiler C were running towards me, barking and raising Cain. That snapped me out of my trance, causing me to scramble to my house. My grandmother came out of the house, yelling my name. Once I was almost back, only then did I turn back to look at the creature. I could still see it. As soon as I was in the safety of my house, the creature retreated to the woods. I bent over and gasped, almost throwing up. Whatever that thing was, it smelled like rotten animals and spoiled milk, which had been sitting out in the sun for far too long. My grandmother, worried, kept repeating the question, "What did you see? What did you see?" I was gasping for air. When I looked up and she saw the pure terror in my eyes, she simply said, "You saw it, didn't you?" It's been nearly a year since my encounter, but each and every time I go outside alone at night, I still feel watched, and I feel it's still out there. It haunts Chattahoochee National Forest. From Edgar. I know what I saw that night, camping along the stream in Georgia a few summers back. It still rattles me whenever I talk about it. I had just finished high school and was doing some solo traveling before college started up. I'd heard good things about the trout fishing up in Chattahoochee National Forest, so I decided to go check it out, go camp a few days along one of the rivers that runs through it. I'll never forget the drive in from Atlanta. I was feeling that sense of freedom and excitement that comes with being out on your own for the first time. The forested roads got narrower and more secluded the closer I got to the area I'd marked on my map. By late afternoon, when I started setting up camp, I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle or even planes overhead for at least an hour. I wasn't nervous yet. Actually, I liked the isolation. I was out there surrounded by nothing but woods and water. I made a little fire pit, and I set up my tent as the shadows got long that first evening. I kept thinking what an awesome start to the trip. As the last light faded, I grabbed my new fishing rod and hiked over to a promising pool just downstream from my camp. Standing there as darkness fell all around me, I cast out my line. Almost immediately, simultaneously, something felt wrong. Unsettled, I glanced around me, and I felt for the first time like I was being watched from the brush. I told myself to stop psyching myself out. I stood there in the deepening gloom waiting for a bite. Then I heard a loud splashing sound across the river. I jerked towards the sound, expecting to see an animal, but the woods were still. Strange, I remember thinking. My breath sounded extra loud in the sudden silence. I tried to focus. I turned my back to fishing, and almost immediately something snatched my line and yanked back. Whatever it was pulled hard. I swore in shock, bracing myself against the pull. For several minutes, I grappled with whatever was on the other end. At first, I thought it was a huge trout, or maybe a heavy sunken log. But then the line went completely slack. I nearly toppled backwards at the abrupt lack of resistance, my heart hammering. I reeled my line in fast, half expecting to find my hook and lure shredded or missing. But they looked completely normal, undamaged when I got them up close. By then, total darkness had set in, so I shone my flashlight out at the now black woods and river. The beam only illuminated empty silence. For hours afterwards, I sat wide awake in my little tent, listening to the strangest cries I've ever heard in nature, coming from every direction just outside my camp. That was my first inkling that something bizarre lurked out there. But what I witnessed the next morning convinced me completely. I rose with the sun, exhausted from no sleep, yet oddly wired at the same time. Walking back to the river's edge in the gray dawn mist, I almost expected the night's events to already feel like a bad dream. But no sooner did I start casting into that same pool downstream when, across the water, 2 deer came walking out of the brush. Nothing too unusual at first, until I looked closer in the low morning light. One of the deer had a long, gruesome gash across its furry neck that glistened red and wet. Dangling loosely from the nasty cut was a chain with my lure still attached, glinting crimson as it swung. My breath left my body in horrified understanding. The lure hanging grotesquely from the gashed neck clearly belonged to me. The red paisley pattern on the skirt was one of a kind, custom made. But I'd checked my tackle box just last night, and it was still there. So someone had come into my camp, gone through my belongings while I lay frozen in my tent, unable to identify those chilling cries, then used my own lure to attack this helpless creature. The injured deer stared directly at me, its eyes glazed with what looked like unnatural intention. It was as if it was forcing me to witness its own suffering, fighting every instinct, urging me to run. I knew I had to help the poor animal somehow, or put it out of its misery. I managed to unsnag my pocket knife and flashlight from where I'd abandoned them on the rocky bank the night before. Cautiously crossing the water towards the deer while scanning desperately for predators, I felt totally exposed, wading across the narrow stretch of river. The icy water numbed my legs, to the point I stumbled over submerged roots and rocks. But I had to lock my senses onto getting to that deer. By the time I emerged, soaking wet, onto the opposite bank a few yards downstream from the animal, I realized even if I could cut it free, its wound was beyond my first aid abilities. As I hesitantly approached the huffing, struggling deer, part of me registered that it was unusual for the creature not to have already run from me, almost like something was prohibiting its movement, preventing its escape. The deer's dark eyes tracked my movements with an eerie cognition. Its nostrils kept flaring, not with the effort to breathe, but almost like it was trying to speak to me. I know it sounds crazy. My hand shook as I reached with the knife towards the bloody gash, desperate to grant this helpless being mercy. Just before I made contact, a blast of fetid air rushed from the deer's mouth directly into my face. I stumbled back, gagging on the unnatural stench as a strange hissing noise seemed to form within the breath, almost language-like in its cadence before it shifted into an anguished animal bleat. The deer's legs buckled in the same moment. I cried out, lurching forward to catch the creature in my arms as my knife clattered to the stones. Our eyes still locked in a bizarre connection as I eased the spasming animal to the ground. Blood continued to pump from the yawning neck wound, now soaking into my clothes and skin. Then, with a final, almost grateful look from its deep brown eyes, the deer went still. I knelt over its body, for I don't know how long, sobbing and shaking as the summer insects buzzed loudly around us. When I finally looked up and surveyed my surroundings, I had the disorienting sensation that the trees themselves had crowded closer in my distress, like spectators to a show. I knew in my bones more dark things lurked behind the silent trunks of those trees. I still wasn't prepared for the next discovery that would confirm that nothing in these woods was as it seemed. I'm not proud to admit it, but after witnessing the deer's agonizing last moments, I scrambled back over the scream in blind panic, without even cleaning the bloody tackle off my arms. I also left my knife and flashlight, abandoned again, on the far bank in my hysteria to get away. There was no unseeing that awful sight, nor forgetting that lingering stench of decomposition that had flooded my nostrils when the deer had expelled its final wretched breath into my gaping mouth. Stumbling through the dim woods, I swatted madly at swarming insects, attracted to the bloodstains on my skin and clothes. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was not alone out here, because whoever, or whatever, had done that to the deer and had snuck into my campsite at night was still out there. By the time I reached my little camp, it was already mid-morning. I knew I had to leave, though, gathering whatever gear I could, leaving whatever I couldn't behind. As I hastily shoved a few possessions into my backpack, with quaking mud-caked hands, a flock of crows burst from the treetops suddenly, cawing in loud agitation before going silent. The creatures seemed to hover motionless above my campsite, their dark outlines stark against the overcast sky. I forced myself to move faster, despite the frozen panic roaring in my ears. Before long, I was clambering into the driver's seat of my old sedan when I heard it. The sing-song voice of a little girl, calling out right behind my vehicle. "Wait, mister. We found your toy. Don't you want it?" Every nerve ending ignited at once in my system as I whirled around to confront whoever had come into my camp. But when I turned back, I was met with only forest. No matter how long I looked and stared at each tree and thicket, I appeared to be alone. After a moment, though, I spotted something lying on the edge of the dirt road that was not there a few seconds earlier. A child's tea set, made of weathered plastic and missing a few pieces. It was deliberately placed behind my rear tire. Across the tiny cups and soiled saucers, a huge, offensively bright fishing lure had been draped like a special gift. My lure, again, returned straight from the gory neck wound of the fallen deer. I did not stop to investigate. I simply gunned the engine as a girlish laughter began to erupt all around, interlaced with the crow's warning cries. Even flooring the gas pedal, my car seemed to crawl through the thick woods for agonizing minutes before finally breaking past the last clutching tree branches onto a paved road. I peeled out so fast, the tires squealed for nearly a mile. When the bright, welcoming glow of distant civilization first crested into view after several miles, I cried like a little boy. Ever since then, I have not come back, though I do still have the occasional nightmare. Dreams of ghostly little girls in the woods, and dead or dying deer. Just keep this in mind if you're ever out in the Georgia woods. There's something out there. Those forests are very haunted. Spending the night with a ghost. From Greenwich. When I was in high school, we used to go on a lot of field trips and activities. We had at least one or two activities every month, and it was mostly very nice. It felt great and was very motivating to always have something to look forward to. During my second year, we were supposed to go on a 2-day trip to an amazing place in the mountains that was super fancy. We were all excited for it. Unfortunately, they had to cancel it for some reason. So the teachers had to find a place last minute that could accommodate a group of 30 kids. We ended up going to a camp that no one had ever heard of. It was about 2 hours from the school and very secluded. When we got there, we were welcomed with a big sign that read, "Welcome, we're celebrating our 100th anniversary." I must say that I still have this image engraved in my mind because when I saw that, chills ran down my spine. I'd always been very attracted to spooky stuff. I grew up with my dad, watching scary movies all the time, and I always loved a good scary story. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. We got out of the bus and were greeted by 2 young men who would be our guides for the trip. They showed us the dormitories first, so we could leave our stuff there and begin the activities. Of course, there were 2 dormitories, so we were separated, boys from girls. I was pleased to know that I would share my room with 2 of my best friends, M and P. We were assigned our room last because we had a special room. I've got to explain that the building was shaped like an L. While the longer part was divided into rooms that each contained 2 bunk beds, the smaller portion was only one big room with 2 bunk beds. The smaller part was almost detached from the longer part. We only had a door communicating with the rest of the building. We were quite excited about that, because it was the biggest room, and we would be far away from the teachers and everyone else. But when we opened the door to that room, we stopped immediately. The smell. It smelled like someone had left rotten meat in there. It was so bad that we put our shirts over our noses, trying to filter it out. We tried looking everywhere to find the source, but couldn't find a thing. We had to go, though. The activities were starting. So I put the trash can outside, as it was the only thing I could think of that could be stinking that much, even though it appeared to be clean. The first day went by, and we had a lot of fun. We went canoeing, playing games, finished the day around a big campfire. We went into the dormitory around 8 p.m. that night and talked with the other girls until around 9 p.m., since that would be our curfew. Everyone went to sleep after that, and we went back to our secluded room. The smell, though, was still very much there, but less intense than when we first arrived, so we didn't bother telling the teachers and went straight to bed ourselves. Of course, we didn't fall asleep right away. We had so much to talk about, kids on a field trip. I was alone in the bottom bunk bed on the right. M was in the upper bed on the left, while P was on the other bottom one. Only 4 or 5 feet separated the bunk beds, so we kept talking. All of a sudden, as I was saying something, I heard M saying something over me, but it was almost like she was whispering. I said to her, "Sorry, what did you just say, Em?" She replied, "Nothing. I didn't say anything. I think it was P." P immediately replied, "I didn't say anything. I thought that was you, Em." We all went quiet then. Then we heard it. A loud whisper coming from between the bunk beds. I gathered the courage to open my flashlight and light up the end of the left bunk bed where the sound had been coming from. But when I did, there was nothing there. It had definitely come from inside the room. To break the silence, I said out loud, "Well, I guess it's time for us to go to sleep." After they both agreed, we silently hid in our sleeping bags. But somehow, we did manage to fall asleep, eventually. I woke up to a red light entering our room under the door. As my brain was slowly shaking off the dizziness of sleeping, I heard the fire alarm. I looked at the time on my iPod, and it was exactly 3 a.m. My friends woke up too, and we put our shoes on, opening the door. Everybody was being evacuated from the dormitory. Fortunately, there was no fire. but the alarm had not been pulled by someone since the little button was still intact. Somehow, some way, it had been set off by something else. The camp guide searched the whole place for half an hour, but couldn't find anything, so they gave us the okay to go back to our rooms. I don't know if I need to mention it, but we didn't fall asleep again right away. We wondered, could it have been the same thing that was in our room earlier, setting off the alarm? Was it trying to warn us? We'll never know. The next morning, we were quite happy to leave that place. Even though we'd had fun during the activities, we'd had a wild night and were very exhausted. I'm still friends with M&P, and we sometimes talk about that night. I've had other weird experiences, but this is one I'll always remember. I'll always remember sitting on that bus, looking back at the welcome sign as we left. Two stories from Hexmark 8598. Chased by goblins. I was talking to my younger cousin a while back. He brought up a very strange and terrifying encounter we had back when we were teenagers. So, for context, it was back in the early 2000s. I was staying on my uncle's farm way off in the middle of nowhere. I was 16 at the time. My cousin was 12. The farm itself was located on an old dirt road. It sat on a decent-sized plot of land, almost completely surrounded by woods. Just across the road from the house was the deepest section of those woods. My cousin and I had spent hours tromping through those woods, and we knew them fairly well. We'd ventured pretty deep into them. Never found the other side, where they ended. Now, our grandfather, Freeman, and our grandmother, Ruby, had always said we could mess around in the woods as much as we wanted, but we should always get back home by sundown. Not just because of the panthers that roamed around the woods after dark, but they'd always been vague on the details. I remember every evening as the sun went down, my grandfather would go out and sit in his wooden rocking chair on the porch right after dinner to smoke his pipe, and he always had his 10-gauge double-barrel shotgun across his lap as he stared into the woods and smoked. We never knew what he was watching out for, but one day I think we found out what some of those things were. It was one day in early autumn. My cousin and I were out wandering in the woods once again, not doing anything in particular, just exploring really. I don't remember why we were out there for so long, but all of a sudden we realized the sun was very low in the sky. It was getting dark, fast. So we started to head back towards home when we noticed some strange noises all around us. The trees and bushes rustled loudly, and we picked up our pace. As we speed walked towards the farm, I heard a particularly loud rustle from the bushes to my left, followed by the strangest growl I'd ever heard. It wasn't any animal growl I could identify. My head snapped in the direction of the sound, and I saw a face peering back at me, back at us. Not a panther's face, not a wolf's. No, this face was almost human, but not quite. It had skin that was a grayish tan color and almost looked like stone, and its eyes were this deep red shade. I yelled at my cousin to run, and I put myself between this creature and him. My cousin didn't hesitate, and he bolted on ahead. The creature let out this screech and began to chase after us. It was running alongside us at one point, screeching. The more it shrieked, the more the woods came alive with movement and other screeches. I looked behind us at one point, and I saw a second creature back there. But this one was in the trees, jumping to and fro. It was larger than the one running alongside us. It was nearly fully dark at this point, but we were almost to the dirt road. I wasn't sure if we were both going to make it, as I prepared myself to confront these things in order to protect my cousin. Then we saw the edge of the tree line just ahead. My heart felt like it was going to pound out of my chest, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for some time. We burst from those woods, my cousin screaming in terror, and me yelling for someone to open the door as we hit the front porch. But I didn't wait for the door to open. I smashed through the screen door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. My uncle was just sitting in his father's old chair, looking at me, shaking his head like he knew what had happened. As he got up, he grabbed that old tin gauge from the wall, and he said calmly, "See why you're supposed to be home before dark?" Then he stepped out into the yard. Thing is, I never heard him fire the gun. Never heard any more screeches either, so I figured whatever those things were contented themselves to just chasing us away from their domain. I recall just passing out right there on the floor. The next morning, when I went outside for a cigarette, I looked towards those woods. I saw 3 figures standing just inside the tree line, as still as statues. Of course, my uncle was already out there, shotgun across his lap. He looked at me as he puffed on his own cigarette and said, "Great, you pissed off the gargoyles." That was the first encounter I had with them. A few months after that, after the last of the summer's lingering warmth was gone and the nights had gotten colder, my uncle and I stepped outside and saw what at first we thought was a man. It was near one of the cars in the driveway. It was too dark to see clearly what it was, but my uncle pulled the 9mm pistol he always had on his hip and told whoever, or whatever it was, that if it didn't leave, they were going to get shot. The figure crawled up on the trunk of the car and my uncle fired at it. 3 shots in rapid succession. Every bullet found its mark, but when they hit, it sounded like he had just fired into a solid stone surface. All we heard was that distinct sound a bullet makes when it ricochets off rock. Then I heard that all too familiar screech as what we now referred to as a gargoyle launched itself into the air and dove towards us. We ran back inside quickly. For a few minutes we heard the creature circling the house, shrieking intermittently. Then suddenly, something slammed into the side of the wall. Hard. The pictures on the wall shook, and 2 of them even fell. After that, things went silent. The next morning, we went and looked at where the creature had smashed into the house. The siding on that side was busted. Little pieces and chunks from the house lay on the ground. From then on, my cousins were never allowed out after it got dark. And if my uncle and I did go out, we always had either a large caliber hunting rifle or that old shotgun. Missouri Howler. This one has a certain mystery to it, as I never saw the creature in question. But boy, did I hear it. I even found the tracks it left behind. Better put on your seatbelt for this one. This one happened on an early summer night around 2005. I was again at my uncle's farm in BFE. I remember it was early summer, as my uncle's sow had just had piglets a week or so before all this happened. It was around 10 p.m. My cousins were in bed, and my uncle and I were sitting in the living room, watching some TV and making some small talk. At some point, I just felt the entire atmosphere change. Everything was quiet, other than the TV, which, when you have newborn piglets, it's rarely quiet. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck raised up, and I just had this overpowering sense of dread in my gut. I had no idea what the source of it was, but I was feeling very anxious. My uncle, as ever, was stoic, and while he would occasionally glance out the window, he never said anything, and we never addressed the odd feeling that had settled over the room, My anxiety got the better of me, and I stood up, grabbing his hunting rifle, saying I was going to smoke and check on the pigs, as they should not have been this quiet. My uncle gave a kind of patronizing chuckle and said, "You can smoke in here tonight, but you definitely should not go out there." I looked at him, somehow only more confused by his vague warning. But I put the gun back, and as I sat down, I asked him why I shouldn't go out there, when those piglets definitely needed to be checked on. I had, after all, risked life and limb in a pen with a very aggressive sow and a very powerful thunderstorm to make sure they'd made it into the world to begin with. Then, as if on cue, there was this howl outside. It sounded like a wolf, if a wolf had lungs the size of a full-grown man. It didn't quite hit the same octave as a wolf. It had this bass to it that kind of reverberated the air itself. "That's why," he said, still in his infuriatingly calm tone. "What the heck was that?" I asked, jumping up and going towards the window. "Just leave it be. It'll be gone soon." Now I was getting pretty irritated by his constant evasiveness. "Fine, but what is it?" My uncle put a potato chip in his mouth, still watching the TV, chewing slowly and swallowing, before finally saying, "Just don't worry about it. As long as we don't go out there, it'll leave us alone. It always has before." There was another howl, much closer this time. I was still in full-on fight mode, with so much adrenaline pounding through my body, I couldn't stop shaking or sit still. I was pacing the room, which was what finally aggravated my uncle, who snapped at me to stop. That's when we heard it. Heavy footsteps outside. The two of us went silent. It was almost like something had sucked all the oxygen from the room. The footsteps were right outside. Slow, heavy footsteps. As we listened, it began circling the house. I was now frozen in place, holding my breath, when there was another howl, right behind the house. This time, that bass to it vibrated my chest. Seconds later, there was this blood-curdling scream from the pig pen. Then all went silent again. All I could do was sit down, hanging my head in my hands. I knew what that sound meant. I didn't sleep well that night, and at first light, I went outside. I couldn't believe what I saw. Massive paw prints, the size of dinner saucers, circled the house. Huge impressions in the ground, complete with dew claw marks. They circled the house twice, then led straight to the pig pen. I followed them, and I found exactly what I'd been expecting. The piglets were gone. No remains were there to be found, and that mean old sow had been ripped to pieces. It broke my heart, but I couldn't help but think, better them than my family or me. Here's the interesting bit about those paw prints. Judging by the gait of them, whatever made them was bipedal. I'm not going to cry werewolf here, as there was no full moon, so I guess it was some kind of wolfish man. I don't know. My uncle seemed to know something about it, but he wouldn't tell me. Not then, and not even to this day. Whatever it was, he knew, and he took it with him to his grave when he passed away only 3 years ago. All I'm left with are a lot of questions and speculation as to what it might have been. But thank the stars, that was the only time I was there when that creature came by for dinner. Not long ago, I told a friend this story, and he thought about it for a moment. Then he said it could well have been the Missouri Howler. After a little research of my own, maybe I'm inclined to agree with him. An extremely disturbing memory. From Cabin Trauma. That weekend trip out to my uncle's cabin with my dad and cousin Ron when I was 12 years old changed me forever. It was only supposed to be an easy little getaway in early fall. A chance to do some fishing, have a campfire, and hang out before school started up. But what happened the very first night would change the way I see the world. Dad was excited to take me and Ron out to his brother's cabin by the lake for the first time. He kept going on and on about how we'd have the place to ourselves to do whatever we wanted. Don't get me wrong, I was pumped too. Sounded awesome. The leaves were just starting to turn colors as we drove out there, stopping for pizza and soda on the way so we wouldn't have to cook. The cabin itself was pretty simple. 2 tiny rooms and a loft upstairs under the slanted roof that Ron and I would share, while Dad took the main room. We immediately claimed top bunks, rushed outside to gather sticks for s'mores, and pestered Dad about fishing trips we could take once it got dark. You know, normal kid stuff. After we gorged ourselves on burnt marshmallows, and Dad let us sip his beers around the fire, Ron conked out in the top bunk as soon as the lights were out. But I couldn't sleep right away, up there under the low rafters. The not-so-distant shrieks of animals and branches scraping the roof kept distracting me. I wasn't really scared being from the country and all, just wound up, I guess. I have no idea what time it was when I startled awake later that night. The first thing I noticed was how icy cold the room felt on my face. That's when I saw that the loft door was wide open at the top of the stairs, letting frigid air rush in. Confused, I leaned over the bed railing, expecting to see the glow of the downstairs lights on. But the cabin below was pitch black and dead silent, except for a strange intermittent wheezing sound. The hairs on my arms stood at attention as I strained to see through the darkness towards that weird noise. It sounded like some kind of sick animal struggling to breathe. That's when I noticed the moisture on the wooden floor by my bed. Too dark to make out colors, but something had left a wet, shiny trail across the old floorboards, all the way from the open doorway to the side of my mattress. My stomach turned to water as goosebumps erupted everywhere. I was frozen as I stared down at whatever was next to me, wheezing there in the dark. I could just barely make out a heap of matted fur hunkered against the bed frame. The wet trail led directly to it. In the shadows, its fur almost seemed to ripple and move over bulky flesh, its breath coming out in sporadic, guttural bursts. I squinted desperately. Were those gnarled hands emerging from the fur? And I nearly yelped out when I glimpsed it. A distorted head with pointed ears twitching atop a distorted body, convulsing on the floor. My heart stuttered in my chest. I couldn't even cry out to Dad or Ron. I stayed under my blankets, shivering. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was some terrible dream. But the image blazed behind my eyelids. The human-like hands, canine head. It was a mismatched living nightmare, and was right beside my bed, soaked in some dark fluid, and it was morphing and changing. Between wheezes, I began to hear cracking sounds, like its bones breaking and reshaping. All I could do was lay paralyzed in pathetic silence, waiting for the wheezing to stop. After what felt like forever, over the frantic pounding of my heart in my ears, I detected labored footsteps crossing the small room, and the sucking of air as the outside door slowly swung shut, enclosing me in safety once again. I never told Dad or Ron what I saw. The next morning, they saw the wet trail. The 3 of us even found mangled squirrels and a bloody trail on the porch leading out towards the woods that no one mentioned out loud over breakfast. I hardly slept the next 2 nights, listening to things rustling outside instead. I don't know what that was, and I still don't like thinking about it. But I won't ever forget it either. To have seen something like that, and to know that things like that exist, I think I might be scared of the dark forever.
Think Verizon's best 5G network is expensive? Think again. This season, bring in your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store for a better deal. Then use those unwanted bills to wrap up goodbye gifts to AT&T. Or cut them into snowflakes to celebrate your switch from T-Mobile. 'Tis the season to save at Verizon. Just bring in your bill to your local Verizon store and we'll give you a better deal. Rankings based on root metric root score report dated 1/2025. Your results may vary. Requires postpaid consumer mobile bill dated within the past 45 days and same name as person redeeming deal. Additional terms apply.
6 years in a haunted house. From Misaligned. It was October of 2003 when my small family moved into a new house. Newly built, so no one lived there before us. It was a cute little blue ranch house located in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. It had a bright and sunny open floor plan, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 acres surrounded by woods. It was adorable. Perfect. The first thing my husband and I did was set up the nursery, as our daughter was only 6 months old at the time. The first night there, it was unreasonably hot. When I got my daughter ready for bed, I grabbed her footy pajamas from the dresser. Then I thought, it's too hot for pajama feet. So I left the PJs on her changing table and put her to bed in her onesie. The next morning I woke up to her crying like she was agitated. This wasn't like her. So I went to her room and I kid you not, her feet had been pulled through the slats of the crib and the footy pajamas had apparently floated across the room because the pajama feet were on her feet outside the crib. I was horrified. Yeah, that was night 1. I didn't tell my husband about this. He would think I was crazy. So I chalked it up to maybe it was his deceased mother. I tried to forget about it, but the activity here did not stop there. We lived in that house for 6 years, and a lot happened. I'll give you some highlights. We had doors opening and closing, faucets turning on full blast, TV and radio going on and off. You know, regular haunting type stuff. But it seemed like every time I had a baby, the activity ratcheted up a level. After my first son was born, things intensified. I was exercising in the basement. Well, stretching actually. And something breathed in my ear. And I mean like a violent exhale, right by my ear. Then it started to flick my earrings randomly throughout the day, so I stopped wearing anything dangly. It started moving things around in my daughter's room. At one point, we couldn't get into the bathroom because a vanity drawer had been opened, blocking the door. At this point, I was terrified, but we couldn't afford to leave, and the kids were too little to know what was happening. My husband was a skeptic. I was a stay-at-home mom, so I was there alone most of the time, while my husband was at work. He didn't get to experience everything that I did. Although he was there for some of it, he always played it off, like this could be normal. Then I got pregnant with my third, and all hell seemed to break loose. I remember being sick as a dog, sitting on the couch while the 4- and 6-year-olds were napping. Randomly, a battery-operated toy sitting next to me went off. I thought the batteries must have been dying, because battery-operated toys do go kooky sometimes when that happens. But then another toy went off in the mudroom to my right. Then one went off in the dining room to my left. Then the one next to me went off again. It went around and around, getting faster and faster until I finally broke down and said, "Stop it, you're scaring me." Then everything went silent. At this point, I was staying outside with the kids as much as possible. I felt more secure out there. But one day I was taking the kids to the library, and halfway there I turned around, as I'd forgotten something. When we got back home, my daughter's tricycle was sitting in the middle of my parking spot. It had to have been pushed up the hill just to get there. That was a terrifying moment when I realized it could go outside. we weren't safe anywhere. Then things got more physical. Up to this point, I could tell myself it was creepy, but harmless. But one day, my 6-year-old came out of her bedroom, and she was mad. She was holding a stuffed animal, asking me why I threw it at her. Clearly, I hadn't, but something had. She had also started noticing the things in her room were moving around while she was asleep. One night, I was awakened by the feeling of my bra strap being snapped. I thought, was I dreaming that? Right as something snapped it again. Nope, that wasn't a dream. But which kid is doing this? Then, with much effort, I flipped my huge pregnant belly to the other side and looked into the face of no one. I knew there was someone there, but I couldn't see them. A number of days later, my 4-year-old son was walking down the hallway to show me one of his Lego inventions, and I saw something invisible shove him into the wall, sending his invention crashing to the ground. He asked what happened, and I said it must have been the dogs, at which point he went to the couch where the 2 dogs were sleeping at the time. He said, No, that was bad." Things were starting to get violent. Then came the last straw. My daughter came to me and said, "Mommy, I think my guardian angel wants to know what I look like when I'm scared." A chill ran down my spine. I asked her to elaborate. My 6-year-old daughter said, "It climbs up onto my bed at night, and it watches me sleep." That has stuck with me. It climbs up. My skin crawled, even 14 years later. It was at that point I told my husband, "I'm done. I'm leaving. I don't care if we go bankrupt. I don't care if we have to live in the car. I'm out." And he got us out. We bought a second house and moved. We had 1 income and 2 house payments, and we were flat broke. But I'd never been happier. I was terrified that it would follow us, but it didn't. Thank God. Now, to my great pleasure, I must disclose, my husband spent a few weeks fixing up odds and ends in the house by himself before we could sell it. Without dogs and kids to blame on things, he noticed the weird happenings and admitted that the house was haunted, and he apologized for making me stay there for 6 years. I told myself I would never enter that house again, but I had to clean it to sell it. So I pulled into that long gravel driveway one last time, parking in my old spot and trying to prepare myself. I was terrified. Things were quiet to start with, but while I cleaned the kitchen, I asked my husband to pick up his tools in the mudroom. Then I heard him messing around in the basement. I thought, of course he isn't doing what I asked him, chuckling to myself. Then I heard a strange sound from the window, and to my surprise, I saw my husband sweeping the garage. Still not what I asked, but I digress. I was listening to boxes being tossed in the basement, but there my husband was outside. I just turned up the radio and finished cleaning, then got the heck out of there. I have some advice. If you move into a place and think it might be haunted, ignore. Do not talk about it. Whatever happens, blame it on the cat, blame it on the kids, the wind, whatever. And whatever you do, don't talk to it, do not call it out. That's what it wants. It wants attention. And by the way, we did have the house cleansed and blessed by an ordained minister before selling it. So hopefully whoever moved in after us had a better time with the place. Thank you for listening to Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoy this show, think about supporting us. There are several ways you can. Search for EerieCast on your favorite podcast app and follow our other scary shows. especially the other two I host, Tales from the Break Room and Camping Horrors. Leave Unexplained Encounters a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts. The more we get, the higher we climb in the charts. Get some cool merch at eeriecast.store, or unlock tons of cool extras like exclusive audiobooks and music tracks, ad-free access to all our shows,